Thank you for listening to the Conform to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. My name is George Mays. I'm here with Jay Jones, and this is Text Driven Tuesday.
Good morning.
Here we are on a Monday morning.
Yep.
Last day of September.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone gonna wake up that Green Day guy?
We should have. If we were a high quality podcast, we would have had that ready.
We would have had that song ready.
Yeah.
It's an old song.
Yeah. George, I had a crazy dream last night, dude.
Did you?
Oh, dude. And it was super vivid. You ever had like a dream? It's like so vivid and like so much detail. It's like real. It's like reality. And you like don't realize it's not real till you wake up. I had a dream like that. So I'm in Kansas City. It's nighttime. And for whatever reason, I was with Angie. I I gotta use the bathroom. I was like, they're right there. Just pull in there to that church. It was a church that we attended when I was in high school a couple times. Assemblies of God Church. There, big one. Had a kind of like a famous pastor named Mike Perky, I think was his name. Perky. Yeah. Anyway, he's like big in Assembly of God. He's like sings. He's a gospel singer, preacher. So I go in there and they're having night church. And I was like, well, I'm just going to pop in and check this out. So I go in there. Guess who's in there? Steve Lawson. Steve Lawson who's in there. And he's about to,
Okay.
Bro, and I mean, he's like, it seems real.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is he doing in here? Like, he hasn't even he's been like absent, no statements or anything.
Yeah.
I was like, he's trying to like low key restart his ministry in
The Assemblies of God.
the charismatic world. So I go up to him and I'm like, hey, I start to talk to him. I'm like, dude, what you did, I don't know all the details, and I don't know if everybody needs to know like all the details, but like you need to make a public statement. And like I was getting ready to get my phone out and like show him video he sent Drake and stuff, and I'm like, you need to make a public statement. And I woke up, my alarm went off.
Okay.
But it was so real.
Wow.
It was so like vivid, and it's like the most vivid dream I had in a long time.
Huh.
Yeah. Crazy, huh?
Very, yes.
Yeah.
Didn't plan this. I know that a church member sent you this also.
What is it?
It's about another dream.
Oh yeah, Greg Lockie. Yeah.
I thought
Dude is
that would be
unhinged,
I thought that this would be a fun little start to Text Driven Tuesday.
Sure.
I did not realize you were going to be talking about your own dream. Your dream's a little more grounded than. So, church member sent this link to me this morning. Sent it to you also.
Yeah.
Is it Lockie?
I don't know.
I just always say Greg Locke.
We'll just start. I'm gonna start
know.
calling him Greg Loki.
Loki.
Yeah, 'cause he's got.
This guy's a preacher.
Well, I would maybe not use that term.
Maybe. He's part of the.
He's definitely not a Bible preacher.
Yeah. He is an exorcist, I guess. I guess we just call him that. Deliverance ministry is what they call it. They deliver people from demons. And so he's a big name in the deliverance ministry scene, which has been growing.
Yeah.
If you're on social media very much, you'll run across these deliverance guys who are quote unquote casting out demons.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that these like you have to understand like the real demons. They're thinking like 5 steps ahead of you and society. And you ever notice how in the deliverance ministries there's this void of the gospel? Mm-hmm. It's just completely void of lifting up Christ and the gospel and deliverance from sin. Mm-hmm. It's absent.
Oh yeah, they're just the most bizarre videos.
Yeah,
very fake.
Oh yeah,
very fake. fake deliverances. But anyway, Greg Locke or Lockie or Loki or however you want to say.
Let's just call him Loki.
Whatever you want to say. His name. He posted on Facebook Saturday morning about a dream that he had.
Yeah.
And so I thought that, well, we got some time this morning. Let's talk about let's read his dream. And I didn't know that you were going to talk about your dream. So it's providential, Jay, that we talk about this. All right, you can put it up on the screen if you want to. What I'm about to share is absolutely true and totally supernatural.
Totally, George. Just trust him, bro.
It is absolutely true.
Just trust him,
it's like some letter to the editor. What I'm about to share is absolutely true and totally supernatural. If you still argue about deliverance, demons, and witchcraft, just move along. I won't waste time arguing with foolish people. But for those that are actually paying attention and understand the biblical mandate of spiritual warfare, keep reading. Late Thursday night, I was sleeping on the bus while headed home from preaching in Missouri. I had the most unusual dream. There it is, just like you.
Yeah.
It's the most unusual dream. It was one of those dreams that grips you and you can't shake it throughout the day. Hey, I'm just saying, Jay. My wife was being chased by large mermaids in a dirty river. I was chasing them to protect her. Suddenly, there was a group of miniature mermaids, maybe 2 feet in length. As one tried to bite me, I snatched it out of the water. She had dark eyes, long blonde hair, and her facial features were very detailed. The moment I grabbed her to stop her, she turned into a ferocious, demonic being resembling a vampire. I threw her on the shore, got to my wife. It was quick. It was weird. It was bothersome. Before I continue, let me state emphatically that there is without a doubt a quote unquote mermaid spirit that torments, deceives, and seduces people. It's a massive known and practiced fact in the world of witchcraft. It's also why I have nothing to do with Starbucks. That's another post for another time. The dream bothered me all day. I remembered a few months ago a preacher friend of mine talking about a mermaid spirit trying to destroy him and his marriage. I asked the Lord to help me understand what was coming against me. My wife and I decided to go on a dinner date that same night, Friday, since I'd be flying early this morning to D.C. I'm on that flight now. We started driving, and I said, babe, I need to tell you about this crazy demonic dream I had last night. I explained it, and she said, wow, that's crazy. I was just studying the marine kingdom and how it affects people spiritually. Warlocks use those demons as monitoring spirits and cause curses and problems for people they send them to. Okay. Hope you're still with me. If you can't handle this type of talk, you've got some real growing to do, and your pastor needs to start preaching the actual Bible.
Dude, I missed a lot of the Bible, I think. I must have missed a lot of stuff.
Yeah. After that discussion, she randomly suggested a restaurant we rarely go to. We pulled in, sat down, and bam, I felt an evil presence. I sat in silence for a few minutes. Of all the places we could go, we chose this one. A lady took our order, but she was not the same person that brought our food. When the food was placed before us, I looked at my wife and said, I'm going to tell you something crazy, but hear me out. And you still with him, Jay? An overwhelming sensation came over me. The hair on my neck stood up and tears filled my eyes. I had a moment of strange sadness and fear that struck me without warning. My wife could see it on my face. I was numb. I said to her, you see that girl that brought us our food? That's her, 1,000%. That's the mermaid I caught in the river that attacked me. There's no mistaking it. It's her. The place was packed, but she kept walking past us. She even came outside as we went to our car. We didn't eat much. They still ate.
They still ate the food? That's how you know it's like not even real, bro.
Yeah.
He still ate it.
It was an obvious and awkward encounter. I'm telling you, witchcraft is real. Spirits that monitor your behavior are a reality. I don't know all that the encounter was showing me, but I do know it was a supernatural encounter and important moment. You better armor up, saints. The kingdom of darkness is on the prowl, and only the biblically wise will remain victorious. You better get in the secret place. Things are about to get real. The veil between the natural realm and the supernatural realm is getting thinner by the day. The wise will heed the warnings. The foolish will criticize and deny. Choose wisely. Demons don't stop simply because you deny them, and witchcraft rapidly grows in secrecy and ignorance. So, there you go. Beware of the mermaid spirit, Jay, that might be monitoring you.
Yeah. Still ate the food. Little detail there. That kind of tells you he's got a good imagination.
Still ate the food. Yeah.
Wild, man. You know what? It seems like he might have forgotten about maybe the demon that influenced him to like be abusive to his first wife and then to divorce her.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe he forgot about that. Or maybe the one that tells you can just keep being a pastor even though you disqualified yourself from ministry. Maybe those are the ones he needs to worry about.
Yeah. Hey, if you can't handle this talk, you got a lot of growing up to do.
Got a lot of growing up.
And you better find a pastor that actually starts preaching the Bible.
Find yourself a pastor that preaches this, even if he was abusive to his first wife and divorced her.
Yeah. So there you go. I thought that was a good story to start the day off with.
Never mind those pastors that just have one wife, like the Bible says, and are kind to her, and they preach expositionally. They don't preach the Bible. They don't preach the Bible, George.
If you don't go to a church where your pastor is preaching about mermaid spirits, I don't know what to tell
you.
I'll
be honest with you. You think, like, if the veil is torn and the supernatural and the spiritual, they come together, and there's, like, demons and Nephilim running around, is that not, like, kind of a dream for you? Because then you can, like, create a band of demon hunters.
Oh, yeah.
Like Nephilim hunters, and you can, like, craft medieval weaponry. Like, it's like a dream come true.
You're looking forward to it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to go out in a blaze of glory fighting a horde of 500 demons?
Yeah.
Who doesn't want that? Yeah.
Not this guy, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, we can think about where we're at. We have all these military men. We're like, guys, the demons landed on the west side of Lawton.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? We just throw our gear on. Get all geared up and grab all the weapons and ammo you can find. Wayne, would it not be a good time? Oh, it'd be a good time, buddy. It would be a good time.
Wayne has a gleam in his eye. Just thinking about it.
Wayne's retired, but you see that flicker in the eye?
Yep.
It wouldn't be a good move. That strategy wouldn't be that good, because then everybody would believe in God.
Yeah.
Like immediately. They'd be like, what the heck? And they'd start to believe in God. It'd be easier to preach the gospel then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, enough about mermaid spirits.
These mermaid spirits, they got some land power. Never heard about these land power mermaids.
Yeah. Getting jobs at Starbucks and
the Mississippi
waitresses at
Mississippi
random
River
restaurants where Greg Locke shows up, and good for them.
They came up the Mississippi. He was in Missouri. They caught a couple Arkansas over, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. You never know what these things can do.
You just don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue, because here's your segue, George.
Any segue is going to be
maybe
we
we ought to consider our worst enemy is actually you.
Yes.
Maybe we should consider
not the mermaid spirits.
And that's what we'll look at today in Romans chapter 3.
All right. Well, if you have your Bible, if you want to turn to Romans chapter 3, we're going to be looking at 9 through 20. This is a famous passage, stringing together a bunch of Old Testament passages to make his final.
I would say they're famous.
Making his final point.
Passage in some circles of Christianity, not in the weird kind that worry about mermaids.
That's fair.
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna be. So you set this up as like Paul's closing arguments.
Yeah.
Like here's the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
He's the prosecuting attorney.
Mm-hmm.
He has accused the Gentiles of sin.
Mm-hmm.
He's turned on the Jews and he's accused them of sin. Now he's going to make his closing argument,
Mm-hmm.
and he's going to make a verdict.
Right.
The verdict is going to be announced.
Yeah, I mean, you really kind of see it. It's compressed, but the charges are restated. Then he lays forth some evidence, and then conclusion, verdict.
Yeah,
guilty.
Yeah. You started with talking about evangelism explosion, and I completely forgot to bring my evangelism explosion book into the podcast.
I've got one in there in my office as well.
Yeah. This was D. James Kennedy down in Florida, Presbyterian minister,
Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church. Yeah.
Yep. And this was a big evangelism strategy, I guess.
The whole church grew from pretty much nothing to one of the biggest Presbyterian churches in America by evangelism.
Yeah. I could chase rabbits on that one, Jay, but I will stay on.
Why not chase them, George?
Stay on task.
Why not?
So evangelism explosion. It is a way for people to start gospel conversations with people, and really one of the ways that they do is by asking some questions.
Right.
And the one that you brought up is, if you were to stand before God and He were to ask you, "Why should I let you into my heaven?" What would you say?
Yeah.
It gets, it's a conversation starter.
Yeah.
And it really exposes what people think about themselves and what they think about God and what it takes to actually get into heaven. And most people probably would say some variant of I'm a good person.
Yeah.
That's probably the the standard answer.
Yeah. Usually. I mean, I think according to surveys, even among evangelicals today, around 70% of people believe that people are basically good. So what is your natural disposition? Basically good. And so there'll be an appeal to something in that, like, doesn't matter kind of what your viewpoint is, if you're religious or you're a humanist or a skeptic or a spiritualist.
Been hearing that kind of angle with the presidential race right now. Like, this is who we are as Americans. We're hard workers, and we've got all these virtues, and it's kind of the same line.
Yeah,
that we as Americans are just by default good people, and so we've got this great nation because we're filled with good people. Ignore all the protests and the looting and all that stuff. But that is the default position for people, is they look at themselves in the mirror and they see, I've got my faults, I've got my flaws, but like overall, if you looked at the entirety of my life and what I do and how I treat people, I'm a good person. You hear that at funerals,
right?
You can go to funeral of like the worst person that you could imagine, and people will be there telling you how good a person he was.
Yeah, how they're in a better place now, and justification by death.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we believe in now.
Right. Yeah. And so you started with that assumption, and there's another assumption that you brought up. If on that day when you stand before God, the two assumptions are that, one, that I'm a good person.
Yeah.
And God will let me in because I'm a good person. The second is that you'll actually be able to say anything.
Yeah. I think it's a good conversation starter, but it is actually a very faulty assumption.
Right.
Like, do we think that...
I think that we often imagine when we die and we stand before God that it's going to be like a conversation, conversational.
Right.
Instead of Him as judge. I
mean,
think that's kind of this idea that people have.
Yeah, I mean, you think,
I mean, if you go with like the kind of the comic angle, like you don't even have to talk to God. It's Saint Peter that lets you in.
yeah, let me check the roster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, and it is a very, I think, foolish presumption to make. You get to stand before the creator of the universe, absolutely perfect in holiness and goodness, and we're a created being. We think, like, we don't make that assumption about royalty today.
Mm.
Like, you're not supposed to touch the king of Saudi Arabia. Like, you can't just talk to him,
Right.
unless you're addressed, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow we're going to have a conversation with God. We
Right.
only get one, I guess. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think only one picture of a sinner standing before holy God in the Bible, and that's Isaiah. And he's about to be torn apart by God's holiness. Maybe we're not going to be able to. We'll see what Paul says.
Mm-hmm.
Will we be able to talk
Right.
and have something to say in our defense to God?
And this passage it just blasts apart any idea of like the inherent goodness of mankind.
Yeah.
The language that Paul uses should redirect how we think about not just humanity out there in the in the general population, but how we look at ourselves.
Right.
What does the Bible say about me?
Yeah. And I think that really the way 1 through 3 is organized, it's building to this point of this passage. And the goal is to get you to stop thinking about yourself in that way.
Yeah.
It's to make you to think outside of yourself, because the default position is always going to be self-justification, either through the keeping of the law or just by being a good person, being a good neighbor, being a good parent, taking care of your kids, being a good citizen. And so there's always something in us that we're going to try to cling to on that day. And the goal of this is to eliminate all of that so that you are forced to look outside of yourself for a way for you to be justified on that day.
Right. All right. Well, let's have you read it, and then we'll dive into our discussion.
Okay. Chapter 3, verse 9. What then, are we Jews any better off? No, not at all, for we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, are under sin. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside, together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave, they use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood, and in their paths are ruin and misery. And the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world held accountable to God. For by works of the law, no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin.
All right. So we're going to be talking about total depravity today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as you structured this as like his closing arguments. And so your outline is 3 components of God's indictment against humanity, right? And so we've got the charge is going to be restated, the evidence is going to be revealed, and then the verdict is rendered.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about the charge restated again. This is where we've been from 118 all the way to here. So he's going to restate it again.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you can see this if you picture it, just like what would happen in our court. Prosecutor gets up. He's trying to make his last very impactful arguments, and you always see it right in the TV or a movie. They'll be like, "We're here today because someone's dead," and then he'll turn around and point at that because George murdered, this person.
Thanks.
They point at you.
Right.
And so the point here is the person in the chair that he's doing that to is all human cultures. So he asks the question, it starts with verse 9, what then are Jews any better off? So which is similar to 3:1 than what advantage has the Jew. So the question in 3:1 that comes up is, hang on, like we're God's special people. He chose us from all the people of the face of the earth. He made these covenant promises to us. So if your gospel is true, God's not faithful to his people. Now we answered that, and we showed how that's not true. That the Jew, he says, does have an advantage, but their advantage that they have is the advantage of proximity. They have the law. They have God's, and by that I mean the whole Old Testament. And in that law is a repeated history of God's promises and his keeping of those promises despite human unfaithfulness to him. God has always shown himself faithful. He's always been progressing this toward Christ. And so that's a major advantage if you grow up, in the synagogue, hearing about these promises that God has given all the time, hearing about human sin, but hearing about how God is gracious and merciful. That gives you a major advantage that prepares you to accept the gospel, that Christ comes, the Messiah comes. Right. So that's an advantage. But 9 brings us back to the question again of salvation. But what about when it comes to the day of judgment? Is the Jew better off than the Greek because we were the chosen people of God? And the answer is no, not at all. We have already charged that both Jews and Greeks are under sin. Now, that was all of chapter 1 and chapter 2 showing that. And so he's just saying, look, we've already established this. Gentiles are guilty. They have violated not only the general revelation in the world, but they have a form of law in their heart. They sin against that. Jews have the law. They're major hypocrites because they do what the Gentiles do, and they have this revelation, and they don't keep it. They break the law as well. So they're both under sin. And so when you see the term under sin in the New Testament, people are really categorized in two places. There's people that are under sin and people under grace because of Christ. And so this statement is really a macro statement to say that all cultures and peoples, it doesn't matter. Like if you're a Jew or if you're a Greek or you're a Roman, or you're Native American or you're English, like all through time, all peoples are under sin.
Is this another way of saying what he's going to say in chapter 5? You're either in Adam or in Christ. Is it kind of the same? I think, the same idea. Okay.
Yeah. And so
there's really only only two positions that you can be in. There's no third way. Like you're either under sin or you're under God's grace.
That's it. And that's the charge that is restated, and we've gone all through chapter 1 and chapter 2, and we've seen all these statements that the Gentiles are without excuse. Everyone knows that, even they know that those who do these things deserve to die. They still do them and give approval to those who do them. And then he switches, to the Jewish listener and the Jewish reader, that you have done the very same things the Gentiles do. You who have the law don't keep the law. So he unfolds that argument like that. And then he just brings it out and restates it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the charge restated. Not complicated.
Yeah, right.
At all.
Yeah. And now he's going to just pile on.
Yeah.
This is Paul, the prosecuting attorney, and he is just a bulldog going after.
Yeah.
Just going after everyone.
Yeah. And he brings forth the evidence then in verses 10 through 18. And I think what we should know is, first off, before we start going through these, is now the language is shifting to it's very personal, because we as humans will do crazy things, I think, like when we hear that. I believe you. I believe I can see the world. All cultures are under sin. But there are people in those cultures, and all different ones, that are good people. And they'll be justified on that day. Even though the whole world and their culture is under sin, they show they're not, because they're good. And so no one is righteous. No, not one. No one. I mean, this is personal, so you can't escape.
Right. Yeah, I circled all the universal language. None, not one. No one. All together. No one, not even one. Like 8 times he is just pounding in the universal aspect of this. That there's not some outlier over here. Like this is the universal condemnation of every individual who's ever lived.
Yes.
Well, something that was interesting to me, because this is, I guess this is typically called pearl stringing.
That's what they called it.
That's what they usually call it. Just bringing in different Old Testament passages and just stringing them all together to emphasize. It's almost like systematic theology, like bringing all of these verses and passages together to make this point about this one issue. And what's interesting is that a lot of them come from Psalms.
Yeah, they do.
And when you go and read them in their original context, it seems almost as if you could, as a Jew, look at them and be like, yeah, he's talking about the Gentiles. He's talking about the wicked nations.
But some of them are about the Jews.
Yeah. What Paul does is he just puts them all together, and it's like, these apply to you also.
Right.
Like you're not exempt.
If you go look all of them up, some of them are about, like maybe like David talking about the Gentiles, but some of them are about the Jews. So you can't wiggle out. It's like it's almost like he keeps establishing the same thing, but now he's just pulled from all these Old Testament passages.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just walk through his pearl stringing here.
Okay.
There's so none is righteous, no, not one.
Yeah.
But people are basically good.
Yeah. Yeah. So total depravity, that's the term we have for this, what we're going to see as we come through this text. And total depravity is, you shouldn't, like, what I wanted to do in this section is not let people tune out because they think this is a Calvinist doctrine. You know what I mean? Because I think people are tempted to do that. I think maybe where we live, that's a Calvinist doctrine. That's not something we believe because we're not Calvinists. So, but total depravity is something that all of the Christian church has believed ever since the early church.
It's hard to, I don't know what, I don't even want to call him Arminian because you bring that up.
Right.
But what these provisionists, I guess, like the Leighton Flowers guys, when you come to a passage like this, how do you understand it apart from this universal language that he's and the things that he says? It's not just that they're not righteous, because I think that every Christian would agree with that, unless you're, I don't know, some kind of universalist, which would put you outside of orthodoxy anyway. But when you get to, like, no one understands, no one seeks after God, I don't know how you understand that in a way other than no one understands and no one seeks after God. Like I feel like you just have to jump through unnecessary hoops to make it sound like it's saying something other than what it just seems to just be plainly saying. I mean, it's not. It doesn't seem like there's any subterfuge here. Like, this is what it says. Just a plain reading of the text.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it seems like the provisionist, they have, the way they describe things seems to be.
I mean, where's the choice meats in this passage, Jay?
It seems.
Where's the choice meats?
Yeah. Well, it seems to be the way they would describe things outside of the history of the church, what the church has always believed. You know what I mean? So this type of provisionism is kind of a relatively new way of describing a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
And whenever you have something like that, it's...
by new, we mean like the last, 15 years, 20 years?
Yeah. If everyone has believed this, like even Arminians, and they do, you can read any classical Arminian.
A classical Arminian.
And they will tell you that they do, that this is, yes, total depravity is true. Even Wesleyan. Yeah. And the Wesleys, you can look up Jonathan Wesley's kind of writings on this, and he affirms total depravity as well.
Just seeing Charles Wesley's "And Can It Be?" Long my imprisoned spirit lay, fast bound by sin and nature's night. Like, that's total depravity. That's what he's writing about.
Right. Yeah. So maybe you may wonder, what do we mean by total depravity? So by total depravity, we simply mean that
Jay, I'm just assuming that people have listened to our 5 points series.
Hopefully they have listened to our 5-point series on these doctrines.
Yeah.
But if you haven't, it just means that due to the fall the fall of humanity and original sin, that every part of a human's nature has been corrupted by sin. So your intellect, your emotions, your will, and your body has been thoroughly corrupted. And as a result of that, it's rendered you completely guilty before God. And which also goes along with that is your total inability to change that state. So there's nothing in you now left that can do anything to rectify your lost state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the misunderstanding is when people hear total depravity, they think, well, that means that people are just as bad as they can possibly be. And I know, like, my sweet grandma wasn't totally depraved,
right?
But that's not what total means. The total doesn't mean absolute.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't mean you're doing.
It means every part of you
evil all the time, and you're always as bad as you can be.
Right.
It means complete
Mm-hmm.
mind, emotions, will, body, and as a result, you cannot now escape damnation on your own.
Mm-hmm.
It's rendered you incapable.
Right.
And
you look at the ways that the Bible talks about humanity as being slaves to sin,
mm-hmm.
Unable to please God,
mm-hmm.
Dead. Like the language that's used is not one of self-decision
mm-hmm.
to change, and you're not the one who's seeking after God. That's what Paul says.
Right.
You're not the one who's instigating salvation. You're not the one who's making the decision. You're not the primary actor. God is.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And so I didn't want people to turn off. So I quoted Arminius.
You
That's
just shocked everyone. That's a.
Did you ever think we would quote Arminius in our from the pulpit?
Right. Yep.
But yeah, I wanted to do that because I didn't want people who weren't Calvinists I don't want them to have an excuse to not listen to what the text says. So, you can go online right now, anybody, and Google Arminius on total depravity. You'll find a lot of his writings about it.
Yeah. What's interesting is who is the big classical Arminian guy? Roger
Olson. Roger Olson.
When the provisionists put out their statement on traditional Southern Baptist beliefs, right. And they even were denying total depravity, and this big name classical Arminian was like, they went too far.
Yeah, you sound Pelagian.
That's when they should have pumped the brakes and said, if the Arminians are telling us that this is outside the bounds, maybe we should rethink this a little bit.
Yeah, that is interesting.
They didn't, though.
No, they didn't. Yeah. So yeah, we can just. I don't know why we just don't listen to, like, Jesus can summarize a whole doctrine in a short line.
Right.
Like, why don't we just take that for what it is?
Right.
John 8:34 says, "Truly, truly, I say to you." Like, truly, truly means, I wake up. If you were not paying attention during my speech, time to wake up. Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. Okay, that
right.
That seems to imply like imprisonment, and someone that's imprisoned and a slave, they've got to be redeemed by a redeemer. Like, someone has to rescue them from that state. Right. They're incapable, and that's what he says. But the Son sets you free. You'll be free indeed. So rescue from what? From sin, from the enslaving power of sin. But as we'll see as we go through the text, Jesus and Paul, they don't have in mind like sin is a power like the dark side of the force that unfortunately we all have tapped into from our youth, and now we're enslaved by it like Anakin. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not. It's that sin originates from us, and so we are both enslaved and we're the slave master. And so we can't escape.
Right.
We're incapable. Yeah. And so then we just kind of go through the text, and it's not a good, it's not good, right? No one is righteous. That's how it begins. No one is righteous. No, not one, not a single person. And righteousness here, sometimes the meaning of righteousness will subtly shift, and we'll kind of see that in when we're talking about God's righteousness. God's righteousness can be talked about in how He's righteous in His vindication of a sinner by giving them Christ's righteousness. So He's not unjust. So we say that's God's righteousness revealed in Christ. Or God's righteousness can be revealed in condemning a sinner. In that case, that would be His justice. But both are elements of His righteousness. When it comes to our righteousness in the New Testament, and here what Paul is talking about is, has there ever been a single person that in themselves on that day is righteous in their human nature? Meaning that they have all the requirements that God has stipulated to enter into eternal life, to come into His presence forever and escape judgment. And the answer is no. Yeah. No one has ever met the righteous requirements.
And he's going to bring out 2 Old Testament examples in chapter 4 to really emphasize this with Abraham and David, 2 men that were considered the righteous people. Right. The examples. And he's going to show that they were justified by faith apart from works also. Right. Because they recognized that they were sinners.
Yeah. Yep. So no one is righteous, no, not one. And he elaborates, no one understands. Verse 11, no one understands, no one seeks for God. No one understands is about your mind. So if righteousness is talking about it in your totality, what about your mind? And it says no one understands. And I think we think, I don't know how about other people in other parts of the world, but the Western mind, like we think that the mind is like a neutral place. That it's not really, maybe it's affected by the fall in a way that maybe we aren't as intelligent as we could be, but that's not all that's here. So like we think, well, the human mind is a neutral place, and in fact, maybe even tilting toward good, because look at everything we have accomplished with our minds. We do amazing things. Like humans are pretty incredible, right? We can send things into space. You can get a Starlink satellite now for like $300, and you can have internet anywhere. Like you can go up into the mountains in Colorado, pop out your little satellite, fold it out, and boom. And we do incredible things, build incredible buildings and structures and medicine and technologies. But this is tainted by narcissism, which almost in a way just proves it even more. And I found this interesting study of psychologists that recently came out, and it was multiple studies that confirmed the same data, that only 10% of people are self-aware. And that's pretty interesting, right? Yeah. Like if you were just to survey everyone that you know, like your whole network, how many people do you think would say, I'm not self-aware?
Probably not very
Probably
many.
nobody.
Yeah.
Probably nobody. But according to this big study, it's a big study, big population, only 10% of people are self-aware.
And by self-aware,
here's what they mean. Yeah. It refers to the ability to understand yourself, so your emotions, your motivations, and your own behaviors. But one more step, and how those things impact other people around you. So most people, 90% of the population, doesn't really understand truly their emotions, their motivations, and why they do what they do. And they don't understand how those things affect others. Now, you could be a person that does maybe understand your emotions, motivations, and behaviors, but you might not understand how that affects everybody around you.
Yeah. This would be like self-reflecting. And I'd probably agree that most people are not that way. And I would say that it's probably because of how loud our lives are. Like we've got TV, we've got music, we've got our phones, we've got social media. We're always watching videos or movies or whatever. And when's the last time you just sat in silence?
Yeah.
Like no one's thinking deeply because they're so distracted by so much stuff that there's just no time. There's no time to reflect on. You just kind of go in autopilot and just go through your day, just by routine. You're not thinking about all this stuff,
right?
Because you've always got something buzzing in your ear.
What you're going to do next, yeah, all your plans.
Yeah. So this is really important because this has big repercussions for the way that we construct our worldviews, because our mind is corrupt. There's no one that understands, because your mind has actually, because of total depravity, your mind is it has its own presuppositions. It's going to have its own it's going to come to its own conclusions based on that corruption.
Right.
And so when we're reading unbelievers in areas like science, or I get in trouble, like psychology, these things that are touching on big reality,
right?
Unbelievers can make accurate observations,
right?
But because their mind is corrupt, and like a lot of scientists are atheists, their corrupt mind is going to lead them to corrupt conclusions. Right.
Yeah. I had this conversation with my daughter last week, because she's in college psychology right now. She's taking that, even though she's in high school. She's taking that, and the teacher kind of gave a warning. So they're talking about like different like disorders. And she's like, I just want to warn you guys that we're going to start going through all these things. And what happens every year is somebody comes up to me and is like, I think I have that.
Right.
Or I think my parents have this. She's like, don't do that, because in all likelihood, the answer is no, they don't. Like, everybody has some of these things that could fit into these categories. But so I was like, yeah, keep in mind that your teacher and people that this is what they really believe, they're coming from a materialist worldview where they think you've just evolved from nothing.
Yeah.
You evolved from, bacteria.
Right.
And so they're categorizing observations that they make.
That can be accurate.
They can be accurate.
They can make accurate observations and categorize stuff. But if they think that we're just there's not really any big difference between us and the animals, and we're like, the things we do are just because our neurons are firing in a certain way, and there's chemicals that are reacting, and that's what's causing us to do stuff, then they're going to come to a different conclusion than we are as Christians.
Right.
And those the closer that the subject is to theology, the closer it is to God and ultimate reality, the more corrupt it's going to be.
Yeah.
So you just have to be aware, like when people say that, like, trust the science, like, you're acting like science is just neutral. Like, it's devoid of any kind of worldviews or biases, or you're assuming that the scientist isn't persuaded by money or political influence or something to ignore some of this data to emphasize this data, so you get this conclusion. And this is in all kinds of areas, all kinds of fields.
Yeah. And so I asked her to, like, we were talking about that too, and like how your own self can influence your observation and your conclusions. It's like, did you guys talk about how all the fathers of modern psychology are sexual deviants and perverts? That's what I asked her. I said, did they tell you some of them were pedophiles?
Yeah.
She's like, no. Yeah.
Right.
That kind of might have influenced the way they formed their understanding of psychology.
Yeah. They all did have some major major hangups when it came to sex.
Yeah. Big problems.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so I think it is maybe an accurate observation that people are not self-aware, but really they've left out the most important part, the reality of God, right? So
right.
that's left out of the equation completely. But if you include God in the equation, people are definitely not self-aware,
Yeah.
right? The most important element of this understanding of ourselves, no one understands God.
I think a lot of this is we are too self-trusting.
Mm-hmm.
Like we trust ourselves.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that we have, well, to use your remark in the sermon, like we've got a serial killer in our heart. like you've got like a sociopath
Yeah.
in your heart,
Yeah.
and you're just believing everything that your heart is telling you. You're believing everything that your feelings are telling you.
Uh-huh.
You don't have enough suspicion of your own heart.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why you need God's word
Mm-hmm.
over your feelings,
Yeah.
because your feelings will lie to you and lead you astray, but God's word will always remain the same, and it will always be true and always lead you in the path of righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes along with people thinking that they're basically good. They don't think that their heart would lie to them, or that or that their feelings would lead them astray.
Yeah.
And we as Christians, we are set free from the bondage of sin, but we're still in the already not yet. We are justified, but we're not yet glorified. We're still being sanctified in the image of Christ, and so we're still dealing with the old man, and so we have to have some of that suspicion of ourselves also, and not just set off to do whatever our hearts are telling us to do, or whatever our desires are telling us to do, or even what we think we're accurately our conclusions are. We need to always test things by God's word.
Yeah. So I wanted people to kind of make that connection. I don't know if I made it clear enough, but like if majority of people are not self-aware, and we're just talking about human things. Well, if we consider God the most important being in the universe, what Paul is really driving at is you are not self-aware. Like when it comes to God, you're theologically completely got it all wrong.
Mm.
So you don't understand your own emotions when it comes to religion and God. You don't understand your motivations, why you do the things you do when it comes to religion and God. You don't understand your behavior, really, what you're doing in relation to God, because you don't understand God.
Mm-hmm.
There's this big barrier that keeps you from discerning correctly. I mean, this should be fairly obvious, and I think that a lot of this kind of takes us back to general revelation too. Like, who can look at a sunset and go, man, I just love how that burning star just reflects. It's just refracting light off of this dust and gas, and it's so inspiring. Like, who does that? We do that. It's so It's so ridiculous, Or maybe, it's sun god Ra riding his chariot across the. I mean, these are the type of things that we do. So no one understands. Like, there's not a person alive apart from God's external grace to that person to open up an understanding that can, from their own human logic, work their way to a place of understanding that would justify them on that day. It's impossible.
Right.
And that's what he's driving at here. And there are many other passages that again, I don't know what you do. If you're just going to take the Bible at face value, you're going to end up, I truly believe, coming into the Reformed tradition, because you have to explain away too many passages, like 1 Corinthians 2:14. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him. Folly means utter stupidity.
It's the word for moron.
Yeah. And he is not able to understand them because they're spiritually discerned. But yet we have entire ministries and churches that are built on the denial of that fact.
Yeah.
That think that a person can naturally come into an understanding of who God is and naturally see their need of Christ. But 1 Corinthians says it's impossible. They can't understand in their own nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's in fact not neutral. They think it's stupid.
Yeah.
So, like, there's some big barriers to overcome that we can't overcome for ourselves.
Yeah.
Romans 8:6-7, which we'll get there eventually. For the mind that is set of the for to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. So statements of ability. The natural mind, which is the mind of the flesh, is non-neutral. It's hostile to God, to the one true God. Now we have to clarify that, because when we'll see that in the seeking part, I think people have ideas about God, idols. So remember, go back to 1. What do people do? They suppress the truth of God. They adopt idols. But the mind that is of the flesh cannot understand, cannot. It's impossible because it's hostile to God. That's the effects of sin on the mind. So, not good news.
No.
And this is the evidence as he's laying forth.
Yeah. And no one seeks for God.
Yeah.
Which, this is where some pushback comes. Like, there's all kinds of people that are seeking after God.
Yeah.
Like, look at we've got billions of people who are religious and are looking for God.
Yeah.
What do we do? What do we do? No one seeks for God, but how many religions are in the world?
Yeah, and even Christian churches in America,
right?
They call themselves seeker-friendly churches,
right?
And their whole church service is kind of designed in that way for a person of the natural mind who's seeking to come in and feel at home and feel like this is a place for them,
right?
So it can be very confusing for people to read that. And first, I would just say, if you got to choose between like what you're observing in the world and what God just says in black and white, it's always safe to go with black and white,
right?
The written word that tells you that, and then to try to kind of figure it out. I think within the framework of Christianity and in Romans and in other letters, I think even if you do a lot of reflecting, like sitting and just meditating and thinking, what you begin to realize is that people want the effects of God or what God can give, and so we readily will seek those things, right? We'll seek after a good life. So people go to religions because they think it'll make their life better, and in many cases, if you're just talking about our worldly existence, other religions could make people's lives better. So it might help them to regulate some of their unhealthy impulses, right? To get a little bit of self-control. It might even help them to be a better neighbor, to have a more prosperous life. And I think it does. If you look at world religions, I had a neighbor, he was a Muslim, and he was pretty hospitable, and he was pretty kind. He'd have us over, they'd make us, some dinner and stuff, and they were pleasant people. So religion can do that for people, and people seek those things. But those are the things that God can give. They're not God himself. People will seek religions to escape judgment. And of course, eternal life. Like all religions are seeking some form of eternal life, whether it's to escape the cycle of reincarnation and go into the nothingness, to get nirvana, or to go to heaven and get your, however many virgins they offer these days. I don't know. Right.
Can't keep track of that.
Can't keep track.
Yeah. You got to pay attention to what Paul actually says. No one seeks for God. Not no one is religious.
Right.
No one worships. No one seeks for God. And what does he mean by God? He means the one true God. He's not talking about people that are worshiping other gods. I mean, he's already talked about that in chapter 1.
Yes.
Like, this is what the Gentiles do. They exchange the glory of God for all these images. Like, they're worshiping. I mean, he's talking to people in Rome.
Right.
Like, they're chasing after all kinds of gods.
Yeah, they're very religious.
What he's saying is that they're not seeking after the one true God in the manner that he prescribes. Like,
right.
You can't even this is an indictment against the Jews too. He's telling them they don't seek after God either.
Right.
Because they're seeking after him through works of the law. They're not seeking through faith in Christ.
Yeah. And they're not seeking God because they're not seeking Christ.
Yep.
Christ is God incarnate.
Right.
So if you're not seeking Christ, you're not seeking God, even if you do it through Judaism.
Right.
And so kind of a way to think about it is we want to have the garden, just not God. We don't want the God of the garden.
That's what Adam and Eve wanted, right?
Right.
She saw the fruit was it was good to make her wise, and she could be wise apart from God. That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah. All have turned aside. That's what he said. There's just a kind of a directionality here, and you think about it. So no one seeks, all have turned aside. Because I think in the seeking of the one true God, you're exposed. What is exposed? Your total inability to satisfy what he requires. Your sinfulness is exposed. So we run like Adam.
Yeah.
We run like Adam into other religions and other things and other philosophies. But no one is seeking after the one true and living God. And again, you don't have to take my word for it because God just tells you that. So just listen to and believe what he says. Even if you're a religious person and you think you've been seeking God your whole life, God says, you haven't been seeking me. Maybe you're seeking the benefits that you think that you want, but you're not seeking me. And that's what God wants. He wants us to seek him simply for who he is, and for no other reason. And I think if we did understand the greatness of God, right, that he truly was as great and magnificent as he is, then we maybe would seek him, but we can't because our mind has clouded that, and so we can't understand God, and so therefore we don't seek him. And they turn aside, and you kind of think. I thought a little bit about it, like the broad road. It looks good, it looks easy, and it looks like the benefits of God maybe. And then there's this narrow road, it's hard. And so everyone is turning aside to that broad road, and that's the path. Like we're all on this human giant death march, which we think is a march to life down this broad road of destruction. Away, we've all turned away. And then we get to the 13 and 15. And that really reveals man's heart by what they do. And there are 5 body parts mentioned. 4 of them have to do with your mouth, the throat, the tongue, the lips, the mouth. 1, the feet. And that's a lot of real estate given to the mouth.
Yeah,
isn't it?
And not described in the best of ways.
No,
the throat is an open grave.
Right. I mean, Jesus talks about the religious Pharisees as whitewashed tombs, and the gateway into the tomb is the mouth, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Your throat is an open grave. It's death. So we speak terrible to each other. Like this is what this passage reveals. Your throat's an open grave. Your tongue's deceive. So
you ever wake up in the morning and your wife tells you that your throat is an open grave, Jay?
I'm one of those few that got blessed with good saliva, George. Now you guys know more about your pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't get cavities. I don't think my breath smells bad. Probably smells like coffee a lot, so that might smell.
Yeah.
But, just God's blessed me in that way.
Well, congratulations.
But I do admit in my own left to my own, apart from God's grace,
right,
that this applies to me. My throat's an open grave. We speak death to each other. We deceive each other.
Yeah.
It's poison, like the poison of a venomous snake. That's how we speak to each other. We curse each other. We're filled with bitterness. And I think so much of this has to do with the way we speak, because what's really inside of us is revealed by how we speak.
Right.
And Jesus says that numerous times. I thought it was kind of cool. One of those providential things that we're reading through Luke, and this is the Luke passage, which I pulled the Matthew one for my sermon, when Jesus tells people that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Right.
Meaning, and that's what we read in our scripture reading. Who you are cannot be hidden, and it comes out by how you speak. And everyone, I think, knows. If you look back on your life, you probably said some really awful and terrible things to people. I think everybody has. And I think it's a good way to...
We can say it in really subtle ways, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like we can shoot daggers
Well, the older we get, the more sophisticated we get.
Mm.
We just maybe aren't as blunt with it, but we're just more creative and nuanced
Mm-hmm.
in how we do this.
Mm.
When you're younger, until like what kid hasn't said to their sibling, "I hate you," like and said it in anger.
Yeah.
"I hate you." Kids say that stuff to each other all the time.
Yeah.
Or "I wish you've never been born," or something terrible. That's a good way maybe to start evangelizing your kids is like, why did you say that? Well, the Bible says your heart is corrupted.
Mm.
And so it just comes out.
Yeah.
Shows your need of Christ.
Mm.
And so our mouth reveals it, but what we do is revealed. This is our feet are swift to shed blood, and our paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace we have not known. So we have the mouth revealing the heart, and then the actions. Just look at the actions of human beings in world history.
You really went post-mill on this in this section.
Oh, did I?
Jay.
I did?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll let you.
No, the exact opposite. Just war and violence, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And
yeah, you just look at, like, observe history. The worst century in human history.
Yeah,
it's the most recent. It's like the more advanced we get, the worse we get.
right.
You think it would be opposite, though? You think like the more technology we get, the better it would get?
Well, that's the way that it's often advertised. Like the more technologically advanced we get, the better this is going to be for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But all you have to do is pull up AI pictures, and you can be like, "This is not post-mill."
Yeah, the AI is getting better, though.
Yeah.
So it's kind of sad that we're not going to get these weird AI pictures and videos where people's hands are in the wrong place, and
yeah, but yes, has this little device improved our lives? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We can pull up information whenever we need it.
Right.
We have like the collection of all human knowledge and history in our pocket.
Yeah, you could ask ChatGPT. You could be like, I forgot everything I learned in chemistry in college.
Right.
Could you summarize for me everything that you would learn in chemistry in college and categorize it? And then it would pop it out and you could read it. Then you could be like, okay, teach me step 1. And it'd walk you through it.
Yeah.
And so if there's an idea you want to know about, you could pull your phone up and teach yourself almost anything.
But then you go onto the comments section on Twitter, and you're like, "No,
yeah,
this that's a double-edged sword here."
Right.
We carry around all kinds of violence and sexual immorality and wickedness on the same device. Right. People get worse. I saw some survey. I wasn't thinking the conversation was going to go this way, but it was how the younger generation, they have like extreme social anxiety, and like a large swath of young people are like crippling anxiety to even order off a menu. Because they don't have any human interaction. All their interaction is through text,
right,
or through social media. Like they don't know how to talk to people because all they do is type stuff, and they're like there's this illusion of interaction with people.
Yeah.
So yes, is it good? Absolutely.
It's supposed to make
does it make humanity better, like in a moral sense? No.
It's supposed to make you more connected, but we're more disconnected.
Right.
It's strange. And kids can't see anymore. Did you know that? This is another side effect.
Really?
Like the kids don't have the ability to see except for because they just look like this. They're just looking down all day long, watching things on a tablet or whatever right in front of their face.
Yeah.
So like eye doctors are like pleading with parents, make your kids go outside for like an hour a day. So they have to look out so their eyes can develop correctly.
Yeah.
So yeah,
our attention span is getting worse because we just have these 30-second, maybe 30 seconds commercials that are just, videos are maybe a minute long.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe. And I mean, you're just bombarded by this stuff, and then you can't pay attention to anything.
Yeah. Say you're watching Hulu, which still has commercials, but they're like a minute long, and there's a timer in the corner, and you're like, this is the longest minute of my life. You remember how we used to watch TV where there'd be like 5 minutes or more of commercials?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And we can't, like 1 minute commercial now, we can't even do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You pay the extra to get the commercials taken away.
So in a like technologically, yes, things improve and things can get better, but in a moral sense, the more technologically advanced we get, the worse morally we become.
Yeah, yeah. And history shows it.
Yeah, it just brings out the sin that's in the human heart.
Yeah, the feeder's swift to shed blood. This isn't something that changes the more advanced we get.
Right.
It's just the human nature. It's human condition.
Yeah.
So we just get more advanced and better at killing each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we see. I mean, we can observe that in our world today. I mean, now we can, can't even trust a pager these days, George. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean, Jay.
Yeah. You guys can look that up.
Okay.
If you don't know what we're talking about. Yeah, we just this is who we are. It's very bleak. We don't like to think about ourselves this way. Shed blood, and our pasts are ruin and misery, and we don't know peace.
It's really easy for someone who is just living in the suburbs to read this and say, "That's not me."
Right?
Like, I'm not like this.
Yeah,
and that just reveals the fact that we think that we are good.
Yeah,
like, we do think that this somehow this indictment from 10 through 18 is not about us; it's about somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's there. I mean, God says it's there. It's there. Given the right set of circumstances, it comes out.
Mm-hmm.
Where we can get to the extreme illustration I gave, but. We're watching this show. There wasn't time for this in the sermon, but I just think this is very interesting if you want to observe human behavior. We're watching this survival show called Outlast, and I believe it's on Netflix. But so this group of people go into Alaska, and it's whatever team, you got to survive as a team. Whatever team makes it to the end can win $1 million. So, as it starts, people will break up into like teams of 4, and they don't have water. They don't have shelter. They don't have food. They just have the clothes on their back and like a hatchet and like maybe a wool blanket, a couple wool blankets. So the first thing I got to do is find water. And so they try to get water. They build a fire for the night, start making a shelter first day. So as the show progresses, though, people are like, we got to win the game. And so what do? Well, let's go steal the other people's stuff. So maybe they're out like scavenging for food or hunting, and then people like raid each other's camp and like steal the sleeping bags, steal whatever they need to be warm for the night. And this is after like 5 days. And I can tell you, if they erased all rules of society on this show, and they're like, anything you do on this show, you will not be prosecuted for it.
It's just the purge.
It would be. I'm telling you, people would kill each other over $1 million on TV.
These game shows are going to need to bump up that prize money.
Yeah,
$1 million.
Yeah, and it's divided. It's divided among whoever you finish with. But you see it just so quickly comes out. They're not getting sleep. They're not getting food. They're not getting water. They turn into just terrible people.
Right.
And there are people who try to be like, you know what, I'm going to play a clean game, and then 5 days later. 5 days later, they're trying to steal from other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's who we are. We don't like to think about ourselves that way. But outside of God's grace to us, like, we are awful, and history shows this.
Right.
If society collapses, people are going to find out this is true. Like, there's a reason why shows like The Walking Dead and stuff are popular. These apocalyptic shows, and I think it's because people know like they would do those things. So, like, if we're on the verge of World War III. I don't know if people know that. We're closer than any time ever to like a nuclear apocalypse. So enjoy your day, right? Enjoy your day. I don't know how the news media. And by the way, I'll just throw this out there: like a vote for the Democrats is a vote for war. It is. It used to be people would be like, "Oh, the war machine is behind the Republican Party." Maybe that was true in 2000. That's not true anymore. It's the Democrat Party. And you know that because Cheney went over there.
Mm.
He's backing her, and so she's most likely to I think, to lead us into absolute chaos and war. But if like Russia retaliates and EMPs us, like sets off a nuclear bombs, and the magnetic sphere like carries that, and the U.S. is back to this. That's what would happen. We're back in the Stone Ages, George. I don't know if you know that. You might want to stock up on water and food. I'm just saying, that's free. That's free advice. But if that happens, like you can only survive for 3 days without water. We're not getting water if there's no electricity. And if that happens, like it's not coming back. I don't think people understand that. Every electronic device is fried. There will be no water the traditional way again for probably at least a year. You're going to have to start like thinking about, are my neighbors plotting to like raid my house and steal my water? Like, are they going to kill me? Because people will do that. Like, it's going to become red tooth and claw. Am I going to let my kids starve to death, or am I going to go over there and kill my neighbor and take their stuff? That will happen. It's not a theory. Like, people aren't all of a sudden going to be like, I've got these moral principles, and you know what? I'll just let me and my children, we'll just starve to death and be noble so that, we don't engage in this barbaric activity. That's not going to happen. We should know that, because remember when we had that giant snowstorm and like people were ready to like kill each other, and I think all the water pumps were off for like 3 days, and like people were in Walmart like fighting over water. We're like always right there on the verge, right. And we never stop to think the only thing restraining this is God. Like God has restrained this through human governments and civil, the threat of the sword from the civil government.
Right.
That's the only reason people don't do this stuff. That's it. It's not because we're good people. But you take it all away, and we're back to this. And what we need to remember is this isn't a text about other people. It's a text about you. Apart from the grace of God in Christ and transforming you as a person, given the right set of circumstances, this text actually describes you. God knows that. Whether you believe that lives in your heart or not, God believes that lives in your heart, and that's all that matters.
Right.
So, who likes to think about themselves like that?
Yeah.
Nobody. We like to never think about ourselves that way. Pretty bleak. It just keeps getting worse the further we go. We're going down the rabbit hole. Yeah.
Pleasant Monday morning thoughts.
Pleasant Monday morning
Jay.
Thoughts. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
What is interesting to think is how Jesus can zero in on this. If you have hated somebody, you already revealed that's in your heart. And who alive can honestly say, I've never hated a person? Can anybody say that?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Right. I think that reveals, and that's why it gets at it. You had lust after somebody. You committed adultery. You hated another human, an image bearer. Right. You're an image bearer of God. You hated another one. You murdered them in your heart.
Yeah.
So we need to keep that in mind as well. And verse 18 reveals really, I think, the core of the problem, that there is no fear of God before their eyes.
Yeah.
It's really what it all comes down to that.
I got to push back against you on what you said about this verse, Jay.
Okay.
Can we debate it?
I guess you can. I haven't prepared any rebuttals.
Yeah. Well, you said that fear is always linked with love.
I think the fear of the Lord is linked with love.
Yeah.
The way God calls for it. Yeah. Fear always maybe no, but the fear of the Lord.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about the way that this verse is used and the psalm that it's quoting. It doesn't seem. I guess it's bigger than just. It's always. It was the always linked with love that I was like, is it?
Yeah.
Because the way that the psalm is talking, it's Transgression speaks to the wicked deep in his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes. For he flatters himself in his own eyes that his iniquity cannot be found out and hated. So it seems, and I see what you're saying from like the kind of fear that a believer has,
right?
And the fear that God is calling all humanity to have is that they think that they can get away with it, and so they're not afraid.
Right.
Like the wicked person here who doesn't fear God, he flatters himself. Like he puffs himself up. I can do whatever I want. God's not going to find out. And so he's not afraid. I think it's the end of chapter 1 where it says, even though they know the righteous decree of God that those who do these things deserve to die,
right,
they still do them because they don't fear punishment.
Right.
They have no fear of any consequences.
Yeah, and I would say that type of fear could keep you from doing bad things, but that type of fear won't save you.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's the driving thrust of all of this is he's not simply going for, if you did have fear, you wouldn't do terrible things. The idea is you're not righteous. And the answer to that is to fear the Lord, which is the right type of fear. Of fearing the Lord is linked to loving the Lord and obeying, so that that then changes the behavior, but not from the negative, from the positive. Like I can do behaviors that are in accordance with the law because I'm afraid of punishment, but that doesn't make me righteous. So to fear the Lord in, I think, the sense that the Old Testament prophets are driving at is to fear the Lord in the way that's linked to loving the Lord, which then out of the love of the Lord leads to the behavior that God accepts. I don't know if that explains it.
Yeah.
Or not to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so I read that quote from Deuteronomy 10, which I found interesting in speaking of the fear of the Lord and to love him and to walk in his ways. Just a few verses later is where he's telling them to circumcise their hearts. Right. So getting to the root of the problem there. And we are, and a couple weeks ago, you can go back and listen to that. We talked about that. What does he mean by that? And why can't we do it? And how it sets up the new covenant and God's promises that he will circumcise our hearts and cause us to walk in his ways and to love him, to fear him.
Right.
Yeah.
The only way you're really going to fear God is if you are converted.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But there's no other way to truly fear him.
Yeah. That's it.
All right. Well, that's the evidence that's revealed. It's bad.
It's very bad.
Very bad. And now we have the verdict rendered in the last 2 verses.
Yeah. And it's every mouth may be stopped, right? So now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those that are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world may be held accountable to God. So now we're back to the opening question. According to the Bible, according to Paul's gospel, what can you say on that last day? And the answer is nothing. There's nothing you can say. There's nothing you'll be able to, because you'll be, and I think, in full agreement, right? Not only, I think, will we not be able to speak because of God's holiness, but it's that there's no disagreement. The evidence is laid forth so clear on the day of judgment, and what's brought in is not only your behavior and your actions, but why you did those things as revealed by your conscience. Your conscience bears witness on that day, but now also the law itself. So if a Jew thinks that his escape plan is to go, but the law, and look how much I kept the law, the answer is there's nothing you'll be able to say.
Right.
And that's verse 21. He brings back up the law. By the works of the law, no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin.
Is he, again, he's talking about the Jews who are under the law, and he's just quoted. Is he referring to these passages as the law? Like, is he just using law as Old Testament?
I think I think that's what he means. Yeah. Sometimes that's how the New Testament authors, they refer to law. They're referring to the Old Testament.
So here's what the law says to those who are under the law.
Yes.
And in that way, since the Jews are condemned under the law, then the Gentiles who aren't aren't under the law.
Right.
The whole world is going to be silenced because
Right.
here's the Jews, they have the law and they can't keep it, and the law condemns them.
Right.
What about the rest of the world? Like the world is all under condemnation. Is that what he's driving at?
You have the benefit of proximity. He said that. And so if the people who are the closest,
Right.
if they can't be justified by keeping what God has said, then what hope does the Gentile have?
Right.
None.
Yeah.
And he's already established to the conscience. So all of that is in the background. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the law is like Mjolnir. Yeah, it's the day of judgment. There's the law. It's Mjolnir.
Okay.
And he's like, last chance.
Okay.
Go pick the hammer up. You know what I mean? And so everybody's over there like, nah, not worthy, I guess. But only one, and he's who's coming next week.
Right.
Only one can go over there and pick that up.
This the whole imagery of the courtroom scene and Jews and Gentiles both being on trial and being condemned. It just always brings to mind Zechariah chapter 3 with Joshua the high priest standing in the courtroom, and Satan is hurling accusations, and the angel of the Lord is standing by, and God rebukes Satan, and they take off Joshua's filthy garments and give him clean garments. And there's this vivid picture of justification by faith. Like there's nothing Joshua can do. He's clothed in filthy garments. He can't serve as the high priest because he's not able.
Right.
And he can't do anything. He's like, Satan is justly condemning him, accusing him of the sins of the people.
Right.
And it's only because God does something for Joshua and takes the filthy garments away and gives him new garments that he's able to actually stand and serve.
Yeah, and we're going to see in chapter 8, and chapter 8 is just an amazing chapter, but who's going to bring a charge against God's elect?
Right.
Like, you would think, this is such bad news, we're going to stand on that day, and there are going to be a lot of charges brought against me.
Yeah.
But not according to the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
According to the gospel, there's not going to be a charge that can be brought.
Yeah.
How can that possibly be? If he's just said that this is me in my natural state,
right.
Well, that means something radical's got to take place.
Right.
And that something radical, it's coming next week. Yeah. And so it's external. So if you do spend some time in meditation, free of distractions, meditating on this text, you'll see I should not look to anything inside myself for any hope on that day.
Yeah, I need to look. The temptation is to say, well, it says I'm not good and I'm not righteous, and I say wicked things and I do wicked things, and the temptation is I gotta do better. I gotta be a better person. But that's not what the driving thrust of this is. It's meant to plunge you into hopelessness.
Yeah.
You talked about that before. Plunging us under the line of despair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Francis Schaeffer came up with that phrase. He says the best thing to do with a skeptic is to plunge them below the line of despair.
Yeah.
To show them they've got to become hopeless.
Yeah.
You will never look to Christ until you're hopeless.
This does it.
Yeah.
This passage does it for sure.
Yeah, I heard Tom Schreiner telling this crazy story once. He probably told you this in class about the guy who lived with the grizzly bears. Have you ever heard this story?
I don't know if I have or not.
Talk about this guy who's an alcoholic, and he went and lived with these grizzly bears in Alaska for like 3 years. How do you think it ended?
Yeah.
Well, before they killed him.
Spoiler alert.
Before they killed him. I'm just surprised he made it 3 years.
Yeah.
Kind of impressive. But I guess he had recorded some things, and he talked about how he really felt that he had really done something good. Like he's protecting these animals, protecting the earth, and he felt like God would be pleased with that.
Huh.
And so Schreiner's illustration was like, look, people will come up with all kinds of strange ways to justify themselves before God, without having a fully developed theology, even if it means living with grizzly bears.
Yeah.
And thinking that pleases God,
right?
And He'll accept you on that day.
I've got a book called "Counseling the Hard Cases," and one of it's a bunch of cases that the secular world would say these people need to be medicated.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's nothing you really can do. They just need to be on some kind of medication to help, regulate this stuff. And one of them was like crippling OCD. And this guy, he could only drive on like odd number streets. Like, and his whole way to get home was, I mean, you can imagine, right?
Right.
And through counseling, like deep, intensive counseling, like this is not the surface level. You just need to pray harder. Like this was really diving into what's going on in your heart. He eventually came to the conclusion that he had a lust problem.
That's interesting.
Like he was obsessed with this girl and was lusting after her. And by driving a certain way, he thought he was doing something righteous.
Wow.
And those, like you wouldn't connect those dots.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like people will do.
It was like a justification. Process.
Like if I like it's like self, like beating yourself up in order to try to make yourself feel like, I'm good with God because I've inflicted this stuff on me. And it's, when we talk about total depravity or radical corruption, as R.C. Sproul like to call it, like we've only scratched the surface. Like we don't really get how deep our sin is. And this helps to plunge us under that line of despair, so that we realize there's nothing I can do.
Right.
You can't live with the Grizzlies or drive odd number streets forever.
Right.
Like that stuff is you're not going to be justified on the last day because of that stuff. It's only because of what God does for you in Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you can see now that these are coming to the end. This is the end of it, the end of this indictment. And it's meant to do like what we were just talking about, to don't look for anything in yourself, that you're a good neighbor. You always take the trash out.
Right.
You do the dishes like you do. Like we come up with all kinds of things. You won't be able to. Mm-hmm. You won't be able to point to anything in yourself. So you've got to look outside yourself for a righteousness that comes by grace. Mm-hmm. And so the whole thing is to set up the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I won't be here next week.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the plan is.
You're leaving.
I'm not sure what the plan is going to be, so I'm going to be gone. Yeah. And so you can talk to yourself.
I don't know. You can just listen to the sermon. You'll just have to go listen to the sermon. Let that be what you listen to.
Yeah.
All right.
But hopefully this has been helpful. And even though it is a passage that's meant to cause you to feel your despair and condemnation because of your sin, hopefully it also causes you to look outside yourself and look to Christ. That's Paul's point. He's aiming us directly at the cross. And so next week, Jay's going to preach that. And so be sure that you listen. Make sure you tune in, like, subscribe, and share. And we'll see you next time. God bless.